If you're thinking about what Bitcoin miner to invest in, or you're seeing if you're in the best Bitcoin mining company, then this video is for you. What is going on, everyone? Hope you all are doing well. And in this video, I'm going to compare 6 of the top Bitcoin miners. This is a jam-packed video, so I don't want to waste your time. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So when we look at the top Bitcoin miners, there are a couple of things that I think we need to consider. First, all these businesses are unique in their own way when it comes to how they mine. And some of these companies actually have other business segments. If I were to take into account all the different aspects of each business, then this video would be over an hour long. Secondly, when I talk about the best Bitcoin miner to buy, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best miner. As an investor, I want to own shares of a company that I feel will give me the best gain. So keep that in mind when I analyze all these different companies. So the companies we're going to be looking at are CleanSpark, RIOT Blockchain, Marathon Digital, Hut8, Bitfarms, and CORZ. Now, as I said before, some of these companies have other business segments other than the self-mined Bitcoin, which means that they are all going to be valued differently. And in this video, even though I will talk about the differences in the businesses, it is up to you to determine what the value should be for their other business segments. I believe there are a few metrics to pay attention to when we compare these companies, and they are current hash rate, projected hash rate, adjusted EBITDA, and balance sheet. Once we evaluate these metrics, I hope that it helps you get a bit more clarity in terms of how all these Bitcoin mining companies match up against each other. So first, let's look at their current hash rate based off of each company's August report. As of recording this video, the largest Bitcoin miner in terms of hash rate is CORZ with a hash rate of 12.69 exahash. Now, CORZ is one of those companies that I've mentioned previously that has another piece to their business, which is their co-location service segment. And so it looks like they actually have a hash rate of 21.5 exahash, but that is not the same. The margins between these segments are different, so please keep that in mind when you are evaluating this company. They self-mined a total of 1,334 Bitcoin in August, which is a lot when you compare it to other companies. RIOT Blockchain is in second with a current hash rate of 4.8 exahash. Now, in terms of hash rate, they are clearly in second. However, it is important to note that in August, they only mined a total of 375 Bitcoin. When you compare that with other Bitcoin miners, that is not much given their hash rate. But the reason for this, I believe, is important. They earned $3 million in power credits for reducing the amount of Bitcoin that they mined. The third largest Bitcoin mining company in terms of hash rate is Bitfarms. They currently have a hash rate of 3.9 exahash and mined 534 Bitcoin in August. Fourth is CleanSpark with 3.4 exahash, and they mined 395 Bitcoin. In fifth place is Marathon, which they had a lot going on over this past year. So their current hash rate is only 3.2 exahash, and they only mined 184 Bitcoin for August. They had a storm that reduced their Bitcoin operations to only 0.7 exahash in June. So they are catching up quickly. And lastly, Hut8 rounds out the top miners with almost 3 exahash, but they generated 375 Bitcoin. Now, Hut is another company that has other parts of their business. The company not only mined Bitcoin, but Ethereum as well, and it appears that they are removing this business. In late August, Hut8 installed 180 NVIDIA GPUs in its flagship data center in Kelowna, British Columbia. The machines will pivot to provide AI machine learning or video effect rendering services to their customers. Even though digital mining is their main source of revenue, the company also has hosting fees, which they get from people using their data centers. Now, I do want to note that the revenue generated from this segment is not great, but there is still revenue nonetheless. I do see this segment's revenue accelerating, especially after they signed a partnership with Enthusiast Gaming and the other new partnerships that they have. So as you can see, RIOT and CORZ have sizable advantages on their competitors when we look at their current hash rate. But now let's look at the projected hash rates. It's important to note that the companies do not have the same timeline for their projections, but let's look at what the end of the year going into the beginning of 2023 is going to look like. For CORZ, they are projecting to get up to 31 exahash by the end of the year. The problem with this is that they don't specify how much of this is coming from their self-mining or co-location services. However, based on their current ratio, plus how many new units they are putting toward their self-mining facility, I'm estimating roughly 58%. So that would mean that they would finish the year with between 17 and 19 exahash for their self-mining, which is still a huge number and almost 50% increase. Now let's look at the competitors. Riot has executed multiple long-term purchase orders since 2019 with Bitmain, and they are expecting deliveries through January of 2023. So they are projecting to have between 10 and 12 exahash by that point, which still isn't close to CORZ, but that is still over double their hash rate. Bitfarms, on the other hand, is not going to grow as much as Riot, as they are only projected to get up to 6 exahash by the end of the year. But one thing that we will talk more about later is that Bitfarms has an interesting strategy when it comes to their infrastructure that could make them a safer Bitcoin mining company to invest in. Now, CleanSpark is a company that I've been invested in for almost 2 years, and I have to say that they are probably the fastest growing of the Bitcoin miners that I have ever seen. They just started mining Bitcoin a couple of years ago, and now they are expected to have 5 exahash by the end of the year. But if I'm honest, I think they're going to break right through 5 exahash. On September 7th, they announced that they have exceeded 3.8 exahash with a new acquisition of miners. Then on September 9th, they announced that they are acquiring another turnkey facility, which will add another 1.2 exahash. So unless they stop adding miners from now until the end of the year, they will be over 5 exahash. However, with that said, I want to give the benefit of the doubt to the other companies as well about their possibility to exceed their projected expectations. But because I'm invested in CleanSpark and know the company really well, I have much greater confidence in their execution. Now, Marathon looks like they will have the comeback of the year because in the next 90 days, which will lead up to the year end, they will double their hash rate from August to 6.9 exahash. Now, for a time, this was the Bitcoin mining company that everyone wanted to invest in, but after the storm and some pushback about the stock-based compensation, they have lost several investors. But this rapid increase in hash rate, especially going into 2023, where they are projecting to have 23 exahash by the middle of the year, could bring some investors back or be enticing for new investors. When it comes to Hut 8, they will have a hybrid approach between self-mining and their data center business. Now, I will talk more about this later, but this does have an impact on their projected hash rates because they have multiple segments to focus on. They are only projected to have 3.55 exahash by year end. So in comparison to their competitors, it's not great. So it appears that Riot and Marathon are at the top of the list in terms of growth. And if we were to only use this as the key metric for determining market cap, it would make sense why they would have the largest market caps out of the rest of the miners, except for CORZ, who should have the largest hash rate by a mile. But the question then becomes, why does CORZ have a market cap under $700 million with that kind of hash rate? And this is where I want to move to the balance sheet for each company. But hey, if you've enjoyed this video so far, hit that like button. That really means a lot to me in this channel. CORZ probably has the worst balance sheet when comparing them to their competitors. At the end of the second quarter, they reported having over $128 million in cash, which looks good, but they almost have $1 billion in debt as well. Now, yes, it is being restructured, but that is a lot of debt for a company who had $128 million in cash. But as of August 31st, the company reported holding 1,409 Bitcoin on their balance sheet and had cash of 47.2 million. This is significantly down from the 8,000 Bitcoin that they had in June. So that already makes me suspicious because if Bitcoin prices remain low, they will be losing more cash, especially with the kind of interest they are paying on those loans. They also had more current liabilities than they did current assets. So even with a high hash rate, that does not cancel the risk that the company has. And this is a big reason why the company is valued where they are right now. Next up, Riot has a solid balance sheet with over $270 million in cash as of June with little debt. They also have almost 5 times the current assets as liabilities. And as of August 31st, they have held 6,720 Bitcoin on their balance sheet as well. This will give them leverage to continue to expand when it comes to their facilities and miners. Bitfarms has 2,128 Bitcoin on their balance sheet as of August, which is nowhere near Riot. Unfortunately, they haven't given us a recent cash update, but as of June, they had $46 million, and in the following month, they reduced their credit facility to $23 million. And had equipment financing of $67 million. Now, based off of their last quarter, they have been able to pay down their debt, but used over 3,000 Bitcoin in the process, which then leads to CleanSpark, who was one of the first to utilize Bitcoin as their main form of currency. Now, what I find interesting is that while many companies have been getting rid of their Bitcoin left and right recently, CleanSpark was able to sell their Bitcoin earlier for a better price to obtain more miners. And that is what scaled them to being a top 5 Bitcoin miner. And this is why when you look at the balance sheet, their low cash looks frightening, but their Bitcoin utilization probably is the best of the entire Bitcoin miners. As of August, they hold 526 Bitcoin on their balance sheet. This is significantly lower than their competitors, but I believe what they have done with using Bitcoin as their primary fund of operation makes it to where they did not need to dilute shareholders as much as their competitors. And we can see that when we compare their shares outstanding to other top Bitcoin mining companies. Marathon has over $70 million in cash on their balance sheet as of August. Now, the way that they talk about their Bitcoin holdings is a little unique. They have a total of 10,311 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but their unrestricted Bitcoin, which is the amount of Bitcoin that is readily available, adds up to only 6,483. Now, I don't really think this is a big deal, but it is something to consider if Bitcoin prices remain low and they burn cash, especially given their long-term liabilities. Their current liabilities are not bad, but when we look at their convertible notes, they have over $730 million. Lastly, Hut 8 has one of the best balance sheets. They have a total of 8,111 Bitcoin on their balance sheet as of August. And at quarter end, they had about $46 million in cash with little debt. So when we look at all of the balance sheets, there is definitely cause for concern with some companies, especially if Bitcoin prices remain low. And of course, many companies with solid balance sheets will be much safer investments. But here is something to consider. If you think about the safety of a company, there is a metric that is even more important, and that is profitability. Given the fact that the Bitcoin price drops that we have seen lately have impacted the overall net loss of a company, even if they didn't sell Bitcoin, I think the more proper metric to use is adjusted EBITDA. Now, I use this metric for almost any company that I evaluate because it gives me an idea of how well a company is doing as they move towards profitability. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So when we look at these Bitcoin miners, here's what we got. Core Scientific has adjusted EBITDA of $59.1 million. RIOT has adjusted EBITDA of negative $65.2 million. But don't let this number fool you. This came because of some non-cash items, and they have had positive adjusted EBITDA in the past. Bitfarms had adjusted EBITDA of $19 million. CleanSpark had $15.2 million. Marathon had negative $147 million, even though most of the loss is from impairment on their digital currency. But they have issues in other areas as well, with high cost of revenue and the debt that I was talking about earlier. Lastly, Hut 8 had adjusted EBITDA of $5.2 million. Now, of course, there are other factors that contribute to me making an investment, but I feel that these are some of the main metrics. When I look at all these companies, there are 4 in particular that stick out to me above the rest. And those companies are RIOT, Bitfarms, CleanSpark, and Hut 8. But which one of these companies is the best when it comes to placing my money? This all goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video. As an investor, I want to own shares of a company that I feel will give me the best gain. So not only do we need to consider the current hash rate, projected hash rate, adjusted EBITDA, and balance sheet, but we also need to look at what companies are valued lower than others. When we look at the current market caps for these companies, here's what we got. RIOT is at $1 billion, Bitfarms is at $256 million, Hut 8 is at $390 million, and CleanSpark is at $176 million. So simply just looking at this, even though RIOT has significantly more growth, their market cap, in my opinion, is still too high in comparison to their competitors. Now, out of the 3 of these companies, CleanSpark has the highest projected growth going into 2023. And even though Bitfarms and Hut 8 have larger amounts of Bitcoin than CleanSpark, there is one other thing that I want to look at, and that is the amount of shares outstanding. Bitfarms has over 206 million shares outstanding. Hut 8 has 194.4 million, and CleanSpark only has 47 million shares outstanding. Now, why is this important? Well, it all comes down to financial leverage. There are 3 different levers to pull from if you are a Bitcoin mining company, and they are Bitcoin, debt, and equity. For several companies in the space, they utilized as much equity as possible, and it led to a lot of dilution. But the problem for a lot of these companies is that they bought miners at a premium in comparison to what companies could get right now. And CleanSpark has capitalized on this in several ways. First, They have been using Bitcoin as their primary currency so they can protect themselves from high amounts of debt, but also they can use their equity for better opportunities. What CleanSpark has done is use their equity as an incentive to buy other Bitcoin mining facilities. And not only has this increased their infrastructure, which in my mind is probably the most important thing for mining companies right now, but also they've been able to purchase miners as well. For example, on August 19th, they completed their acquisition for their Washington, Georgia facility. Then on September 9th, they announced that they have made an agreement for another facility in Sandersville, Georgia. And this is why CleanSpark is in a position where they could grow to over 20 exahash by the end of 2023. So with all that said, I hope that this helps you in understanding why I chose to invest in CleanSpark instead of the other Bitcoin miners. As I said previously, some of these companies have other businesses that should be considered when you value them. But when I think about the Bitcoin mining space, I see CleanSpark as the most undervalued given the kind of growth with their infrastructure and miners, solid margins, and extremely low market cap. But I would love to hear your thoughts on these Bitcoin miners and which ones you are investing in. So feel free to mention them in the comments down below. Also, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. That way you're notified when new content comes out. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one.